There is a kind of small, private ritual that people invent to stay steady in a room that feels like it was built for everyone else. Marcus had one. A thin porcelain cup, finger-warm, the rim a little chipped on the left. He cupped it between both hands, as if it were an anchor. Light from the chandeliers fell in narrow ladders across the linen. Around him, bouquets breathed faintly of gardenia and knife-rolled laughter. People leaned toward one another, as if the world were a switch they could leave on for only the fortunate. Marcus watched them the way he watched a painting he didn't mean to own, because he had to be a possible participant again. He'd told himself, practicing the small acts of being in the world. Stand up when offered a chair. Accept the word congratulations. Look like you aren't counting seconds. He was here for practice and surveillance both. Lily, who was 6 and capable of inventing operas for caterpillars, had been asleep 2 hours ago in a small bed with a nightlight shaped like the moon. He had come out alone because the room felt like the right kind of exposure step. A crowd without commitment. He had worn the navy suit that made him feel like armor that could be reversed into civility. He had not been prepared for the woman who arrived beside him, as if she had always intended to. Eleanor wore pearls the way someone wears authority. Her dress was dignified in a way that refused softness. It had been shaped by habit and intent. She moved with the invisible clarity of someone who measured consequences as naturally as breath. She did not begin by apologizing for interrupting. She began by fixing him with a look that made the room hush a little within his chest. "May I sit?" she asked, voice shaped by years of conversation and small command. He gestured to the empty chair as if he were offering a country to a When she settled, she placed a hand on the table, palm down, as if stating a fact. Up close, she smelled faintly of lavender and old books. There was a quietness to her composed, unhurried that suggested she had rehearsed neither entrance nor words. She only needed the timing to be right. "You look steady," she said. "I'll be brief." The words were not a dismissal. They were a small pact. She told him, in a voice that did not ask for mercy, that her daughter would arrive in 20 minutes. She called her daughter Victoria. Marcus listened because he had learned to listen when people used names the way they used maps. Eleanor's hands described movements as she spoke, one at her throat for emphasis, the other smoothing an invisible fold in the air. Small choreography meant to steady herself and the man to whom she had decided to speak. "She has been very brave," Eleanor said. "But there are some people who think courage is a show to be cut down. There is a man in X who thought to make an entrance that would make her shrink. He will try to make the room remember the wrong story." Marcus heard the sentence in the spare utility way he had learned to hear instructions for dealing with toddler meltdowns or plumbing leaks. Urgent, fixable, not theatrical. He thought of Lily, of the fierce way she could declare an entire imaginary garden existed in the pocket of her winter coat. He thought of the small economies of dignity he had taught her, how to answer with a name, how to refuse to be defined by someone else's words, and he felt an immediate kinship with the woman across from him. Eleanor's eyes flicked to him then, not pleading, only calculating. "I need a favor," she said. 20 minutes? Will you pretend very simply that you are my daughter's sit at table 9. Smile when she arrives. Be perfectly ordinary about it. No theatrics. Hand her your coat, pull out her chair, let her know someone's already centered on her. That should be enough. It was an odd request. It sounded like a scene from a play or a consoling lie. Marcus catalogued the oddness like a man who keeps mental lists. Stranger asks stranger to step into a fake intimacy for a fraction of an hour. Yet the way Eleanor framed it made it something else. She spoke of protection, not performance. When she said fiance, there was no suggestion that this would be a grand decedently, a simple gesture against humiliation. She did not ask him to speak lines. She asked him to hold light. "What makes you think Marcus began. The question cut itself off at the edges because he could think of reasons. He was 41, and good at not being seen. He had an instinct toward being invisible that had been useful when Lily needed him to be all anchor and no glare. He also had a history of saying yes to small acts that felt like rightness, For some reason, that impulse came alive with Eleanor's hand smoothing the space where a napkin should be. "You look like a man who understands how a child builds safety," Eleanor said. "You have a certain way of sitting careful. She will notice that. She may need to know that people can stand for her story." Marcus thought of standing for a story. In the hours before Lily fell asleep, she had recounted, with the solemnity of a tiny prophet, a tale about caterpillars that composed lullabies. He imagined the way she might one day tell someone about how her father learned to be visible again. The favor Eleanor asked had the shape of a lesson he might want Lily to learn. That dignity could be defended by other people's small, particular courage. He said, "Yes, if you like quiet, layered stories about human hearts, follow along for more. There are more like this." Eleanor's briefing was meticulous in its way. She gave him a handful of facts about Victoria, not to script him, but to make him recognizable. Victoria loved architectural facades, the sort that suggested hidden rooms with paper-covered windows. She loved films that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, and used to rewatch the same scene until she could quote it by heart. Her tales included an absent smile when someone praised her achievements, and a particular gesture when she heard something that comforted her. She would touch the back of her left ear with her thumb. "Not the right," Eleanor clarified. "Left. You'll know it when you see it." Eleanor's tone made the tell feel like a secret map. "If you know the signs, you can find the safe place." She told him about the red dress, how Victoria had chosen it because sometimes armor comes in color. She told him plainly that a man named James had intended rumor, yes, a sister's text, the particulars, and that she wanted to block him from giving the room something to remember that would reduce her daughter. Eleanor's hand hovered over Marcus's teacup as if to emphasize the chaste intimacy of the request. "You will not speak of this later," she said. "Not to strangers. Say only what is needed." Let her reclaim her entrance without a circus at the doorway. Marcus's mind provided him with logistical objections and moral ones in equal measure. Who was he to play a man's fiancé? How much of a lie was this? Eleanor's answer was the thing that made him do what she asked without the cost weighing on his conscience. She framed it as an act of courtesy. "You are doing a kindness," she said. "Pretend for 20 minutes so she may keep the dignity of her arrival." "That is not a lie. It is a shield." There was an economy to the idea that suited him. Parenting, he thought, had been all about small shields. A bandage placed without theatrics, a favorite blanket folded over a lap, stories told to keep monsters distant. He had taught Lily the names of the things they could control and the ones they could not. In Eleanor's favor, he heard an invitation to teach himself the same lesson he taught his daughter. That sometimes the world needs to be shown how to look at a person the way they deserve. He moved to table 9 when Eleanor indicated, practicing a smile that did not require cheerfulness. The table occupied a pocket of the room where the light was generous and the crowd diffused. It felt like a stage arranged by mercy. Marcus set his cup down, smoothed his napkin, and arranged his hands as if he were about to hold a book open. There was a private countdown pulsing beneath his ribs. 20 minutes, measured more by breath than clock. He noticed the room differently while he waited. Couples formed little islands and navigated each other with practiced tenderness. A string quartet played with a tenderness that made the air taste like forgiveness. Marcus watched the way the chandelier light caught the pearls at Eleanor's throat and reflected back as small, white affirmations. He watched Eleanor lean forward, check a menu with the interest of someone making a plan, then settled back when she saw the door where Victoria would arrive. When Victoria walked in, she cut through the room the way a comet cuts through dusk bright, intended, leaving a small trail of awareness. The red dress was not a plea for attention. It was an assertion. She moved without hesitancy, shoulders open to the room, head held like a woman who had spent time learning how to carry herself so exile would not make her bow. She had a laugh that was almost brash, and a stillness that suggested she was practiced in occupying space rather than shrinking from it. Marcus saw the ear touch immediately. She brushed her left hand to the back of it when a nearby table began to murmur about her ex. It was a micro-movement, a small, private code that made the moment feel intimate despite the crowd. He rose and offered her his hand the way a man offers a coat to a guest. She accepted without questioning. There was no searching in her eyes for scandal, no hunger for rescue. She took the offered seat and met the world with a directness that made the conversation feel less like a performance and more like two people agreeing, word by word, that the moment could be ordinary. "Good evening," he said. The phrase was ordinary. It was also an offering. "Odd time for a test of manners," she replied, and there was a wry tilt to her mouth as if she were amused by the theater of reality. Her voice had a film quality mbelledin, full of the kind of irony someone used to seeing the world with an architect's eye might have. The first exchanges were simple. Mutual introductions, no backstory. Marcus kept to Eleanor's instructional references to the favor, no elaborate declarations. He pulled out her chair, as if it were a ceremony, from another era. Small things built their bridge. He picked up her napkin and placed it with a small, deliberate care that surprised both of them into smiling. He refilled her teacup when it grew thin, because he had learned that the steady refilling of a container was one of the quiet ways to say, "I see you." She reciprocated with little stories, not confessions, but gestures of self. She mentioned an apartment she once toured that had a hilly staircase leading to a single window, the kind of place where light came through like a memory. She spoke of an old cinema where she'd watched a black and white movie so many times she could predict the lines. Marcus found that he could match those fragments with his own. Lily's insistence on describing clouds as wool and the way she could make caterpillars hum like lullabies. They laughed together about small absurdities such as the proprietor of a neighborhood bookshop who packed odd crates of unnamed books for people who wanted to be surprised. Victoria confessed that she sometimes bought those mystery crates and then placed the books on her shelves as if they had always belonged there. Marcus told her about the way Lily arranged a row of spoons on the windowsill in the exact order the light crossed them, a ritual he allowed because it made her evenings sacred. These were not confessions so much as the loosening of the hems of each person. The conversation moved like people opening windows to the same small street. It was intimate, without being invasive. The ear touch returned often enough that it became a punctuation mark in the dialogue. Each time Victoria touched the back of her left ear, Marcus would notice and answer with something small and steady, a compliment about the way she spoke of buildings, or a comment about the film that made her smile. He did not ask why she touched the ear. He accepted it as code. Eleanor's instruction had been precise and simple. Notice the tell, and respond with ordinary, human attention. That is what he did. The room's undercurrent hummed with the possibility that James might make trouble. Conversations around them thinned in moments as if people were listening for a storm. Yet, in those instances, Marcus discovered that he could act as an antagonist's antithesis simply by keeping the table comfortably domestic, sharing bread, asking about a book on the table, telling a tiny anecdote about a small victory in parenting. The more ordinary their table seemed, the less dramatic the threat became. It was almost as if dignity, when preserved in the small acts, became contagious. Halfway through the 20 minutes, Eleanor approached with the trained eyes of someone monitoring weather. She bent in a way that did not make spectacle, and whispered something about having a word in the wings. Marcus could see the soft satisfaction in the lines at the corner of her mouth. The plan was working. After a brief exchange, she made a small motion with her head toward the far end of the room and then returned to her chair. "She's gone," she said, as if reporting on the weather. "James has left." The two words landed like the closing of a window. Relief moved through the table, not with trumpets, but with a collective exhale that was almost reverent. Marcus felt it as something physical. A loosened tendon, a paused breath finding its rhythm. There was no public humiliation, no loud altercation. Eleanor's intercession had done its work, much as a parent diverts a playground dispute before it becomes a spectacle. Victoria's face showed something that did not need to be named. There was an unmanned, private relief. She touched the back of her ear and laughed, and it was the nervous, delighted sound of a person who had been allowed to keep a piece of herself intact. She looked at Marcus not as one might look at an actor who had completed his role, but as if he were a gentle accomplice who had made it possible for her to enter the room on her own terms. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, and there was no need for a heavy gratitude. It was gratitude the size of an exchange between two people who had kept a promise to the air in the room. "No need," Marcus answered, and the honesty in that answer felt like something he had earned. He did not offer himself as a rescuer. He offered steadinista, preferred currency of a man who had learned how to be needed without performing martyrdom. Time, which had seemed so taut before, loosened. The conversation peeled into different layers. Architecture gave way to favorite films. Films gave way to cities they had loved. Cities gave way to small childhood metaphors. Marcus told a story, quietly and with attention, about how Lily believed the moon was a nightlight someone misplaced on purpose so the dark would feel less like a vandal. Victoria responded with an image of her own childhood of crates and books that were secret friends. Each anecdote did not reveal trauma, but revealed shape. The way these people made small things into scaffolding for their days. There was a tenderness to their exchange that did not require crescendo. It was a steady building of mutual illumination, a mutual agreement to reveal without bargaining. Marcus found himself listening with a curious hunger and appetite for ordinary revelation he'd not known he had. He was not fishing for romance. He was taking in the real detail of another person, and that was enough to feel seen. Victoria, unafraid and quick to claim space, responded with both humor and an almost blunt generosity. It was as if she understood that life's tenderness could be offered without strings. Eventually, Victoria leaned forward and said, without the least theatricality, "Would you like coffee sometime?" "Proper coffee." "Not this. This is too formal." Marcus felt his chest make room. There was a kind of gentle incredulity at hearing a real invitation offered without artifice. It was not a request wrapped in desperation. It was a straightforward opening of a door. He considered Lily in the quiet house, the moon nightlight, spoons on a windowsill. He thought of the small curriculum of trust he wanted to give his daughter. "I'd like that," he said. She smiled in a way that suggested she understood what the answer meant beyond the words. "Good," she said simply. "Let's do it. Bring your tea rituals if you like." There was a moment of delicious, domestic absurdity at the thought of tea rituals traveling to a cafe. It felt perfectly possible. The table laughed softly together at that. The 20 minutes Eleanor had asked for had stretched into something sturdier, a possibility that was not a promise, but not mere whim either. Outside their little pocket, the ballroom continued to hum. People danced, and some older couples took the floor with practiced devotion. A child at another table asked a question about trains and received a patient explanation. In the middle of this domestic universe they had carved, Marcus experienced an odd, generous lightness that was less about romantic rescue and more about the steady return of his capacity to be in scenes that involved other people. When he left the ballroom later that night, he held Lily in the quiet of the car as if it were a thing he had been given back. She woke when he came home, hair-mussed eyes, bright. Her small face, upturned at him, asked, without language, whether he had been brave enough. He did not invent grand pronouncements. He simply said, "There was a woman who needed to protect someone she loved, and I helped." Lily looked at him with the full solemnity of a child assessing a truth. "Did you pretend to be a prince?" she asked. The word prince spilled out with a giggle. "A kind of prince," Marcus answered, and she accepted it as if the vocabulary of adulthood were not yet required. Her satisfaction manifested in the creation of an elaborate tea ritual when she crawled into bed. The two of them making a short ceremony out of steaming water and small biscuits. He watched her arrange her spoons in the exact order, the light crossed them, and felt an unfamiliar pride that was tempered, not dramatic. There was a small epilogue that was not an ending so much as an outline. Days passed with a softness that made itself practical. A text exchanged with Victoria to confirm coffee plans, nothing, including promises. Only logistics and the odd joke about surprise bookshop crates. They met in daylight at a cafe that smelled of coffee and old pages, and those meetings were simple, patient experiments in companionship. Lily, introduced to the idea of dinner plans that did not demand declarations, accepted Victoria's presence in the world as casually as she accepted that the moon was a nightlight someone misplaced. It felt right to Marcus that newness should enter their lives in the form of small, ordinary things. Eleanor's role receded into that of a guardian angel with concrete methods. She sat with the satisfaction of someone whose work was done and who preferred not to be thanked with too much fuss. Her request, surprising in its bluntness at the ballroom, had been humane. It was not the kind of manipulation that stole agency. Rather, it operated like a steward steering a ship away from rocks so the passengers could keep their stories intact. Victoria's dignity remained in place, and Marcus's sense of himself grew not because someone had fixed him, but because he had performed a small, steady act that affirmed another person's right to be seen whole. In the quiet after, Marcus found his appetite for ordinary risks restored. There was a new willingness in him to accept invitations that involved more than attendance calls, lunches, late nights at the library while Lily slept. He began to imagine a future where he could be more visible without losing the parts of himself that were necessary at home. It was not a sudden bloom of certainty. It was the patient accrual of small gestures and reciprocal attention. One evening not long after, Marcus tucked Lily in and sat on the edge of her bed watching her arrange a line of spoons so the light would pass exactly as she liked. She looked up and asked, in the casual way that made adults feel simultaneously small and enormous, "Will she like my caterpillars?" "You mean the musical ones?" he asked, smiling. "Yes, she might," he said. "She might come and listen." Lily considered the architecture of that answer as if it were a blueprint. She nodded, satisfied. Marcus turned off the lamp and watched the moonlight light spill its pale watch over the room. He thought about the ballroom imaginative, about pearls and red dresses and the way a hand at the back of an ear could be a compass. He thought of the small, extraordinary ordinariness of his daughter and how, in a single night, someone's insistence on protection had let him teach her another lesson, that stories could be defended, that being visible could be an exercise in dignity. There were no fateful proclamations, no tidy resolutions. The days that followed were filled with ordinary calibrations, arranging schedules, choosing books for bedtime, sharing small jokes about a bookshop that packed mystery crates. Marcus and Victoria met for coffee, which became a kind of laboratory for easy conversation and shared observations. Sometimes it felt like the beginning of something, and sometimes it felt merely like another fine day in which people treated one another with an honest attention that was rarer than it deserved to be. The memory of the ballroom remained a warm image. A teacup, the way light rested on pearls, a pulled-out chair, an ear touched in private code. It lived, too, as a lesson about the ethical uses of intervention and the dignity of protection. Eleanor's request had been, at once, shocking in its audacity and quietly correct. She had asked for a kindness that was small enough to perform and large enough to matter. Marcus's loneliness did not evaporate like mist. It rearranged itself, becoming less like an accusation and more like a companion whose presence dictated certain practices. Go to bed on time. Make sure the spoons line up. Answer the door when someone knocks. He learned the fine art of being seen without losing himself, which is a long apprenticeship. He practiced it one ordinary moment at a time. On a morning that smelled of rain and coffee, he folded a note and slid it into his pocket, a tiny, tentative plan for a weekend with Victoria that involved a bookshop with great light and a bench outside where Lily could invent her musical caterpillars. He did not spell out a future on that paper. He wrote only what was possible. Time, place, a gentle invitation. The rest would be discovered in the ordinary acts that follow when people choose to notice one another. If this small, quiet story warmed you, please like and subscribe for more gentle tales like this. He kept the teacup in his cupboard for a while afterward, not because it had done anything miraculous, but because it reminded him of a night when two strangers and an older woman had arranged a little kindness that mattered. He placed it on the top shelf where Lily could see it when she climbed up on the counter to help him make tea. Sometimes she would point at the chip and tell the tale of the prince he had been for a while. He would smile and correct the myth with the truth he preferred, that he had been, quite simply, steady. And steady, it turned out, was enough.